The last bus. It was a damp, chilly evening in late October when Jake found himself sprinting down the cracked pavement. The sound of his sneakers slapping against the ground echoing in the stillness of the night. He had lost track of time while playing video games with his friends. And now he was running late for the last bus home. The streetlights flickered ominously as he dashed toward the bus stop. The fading glow of the setting sun casting long shadows that danced around him. As he rounded the corner, he saw the bus pulling away in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. "No! Wait!" he shouted. But it was no use. The bus was already too far away. Frustrated, Jake slowed to a walk, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He pulled out his phone to check the schedule, but the screen was cracked, and the app wouldn't load. He cursed under his breath. He had no idea when the next bus would arrive. The bus stop was deserted except for a flickering neon sign that buzzed overhead. Jake glanced around nervously. The night felt different somehow, heavier. He leaned against the cold metal pole and waited, feeling a chill creep down his spine. The wind whispered through the trees, and he could hear the distant howl of a dog somewhere in the neighborhood. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours. Just as he began to consider walking home, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Jake perked up, hope igniting within him. A pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street, growing larger as they approached. The bus rolled into view, but something about it felt off. It was an old-fashioned bus, one that looked like it had been pulled straight from a horror movie, its paint chipped and peeling, windows grimy and fogged over. The sign above the windshield read Route 13, but Jake had never heard of that route before. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back down the empty street behind him. But the thought of being stranded in the dark made him step forward. As the bus doors creaked open with an eerie groan, Jake was hit by a wave of stale air that smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something rotten. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, trying to ignore the sense of dread pooling in his stomach. The interior was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting strange shadows on the worn-out seats. There were only a few passengers, scattered throughout the bus, an elderly man with wild hair, who stared blankly ahead, a woman clutching a tattered purse with trembling hands, and a figure shrouded in darkness at the back of the bus that Jake couldn't quite make out. Jake chose a seat near the front, hoping to avoid any unwanted attention. As he settled in, he noticed that there were no advertisements on the walls, just peeling paint and an unsettling silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. The driver, an imposing figure with a wide-brimmed hat obscuring his face, turned to look at him through the rearview mirror. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine as their eyes met. There was something unnerving about that gaze. "Where to?" the driver asked in a voice that seemed to echo inside Jake's head. "Oh, just take me home," Jake replied hesitantly. The driver nodded slowly and shifted into gear. The bus lurched forward with a jolt, and Jake felt his stomach drop as they pulled away from the stop. He glanced out the window, watching as familiar streets blurred into unfamiliar landscapes. The buildings became sparser, replaced by dark woods that loomed ominously on either side of the road. As they traveled deeper into the night, Jake's unease grew. The other passengers remained silent, their faces shadowed and expressionless. He could feel their eyes on him, scrutinizing him from behind their veils of darkness. The elderly man suddenly turned to him, his eyes wide and wild. "Don't trust him," he whispered hoarsely, leaning closer. "He's not what he seems." Jake's heart raced as he looked back at the driver, who continued to stare straight ahead, seemingly unfazed by the man's warning. "What do you mean?" Jake asked cautiously. But before the man could respond, the woman with the tattered purse suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream that pierced through the silence of the bus. "Stop! Let us off! We don't want to go!" Panic erupted among the passengers as they began to shout and plead with the driver to turn back. But he remained unmoved. his grip on the steering wheel unyielding as he pressed on into the darkness. "Please, stop," Jake shouted along with them, but it was as if their voices were swallowed by an unseen force. The bus continued down the winding road, deeper into an abyss where even light seemed afraid to tread. Suddenly, there was a loud thud from beneath them, a sound that resonated through the floor like a heartbeat. The bus shuddered violently before coming to an abrupt halt. The lights flickered and went out entirely, plunging them into darkness. "What's happening?" Jake's voice trembled as he fumbled for his phone to use as a flashlight. But when he turned it on, it illuminated only his own terrified expression staring back at him. The passengers were now murmuring anxiously in the dark. The elderly man's voice rose above the others. "We're trapped. We shouldn't have gotten on." Jake felt his heart racing as fear clawed at his insides. He needed to get off this bus whatever it took. He stood up abruptly and moved toward the front. But before he could reach the driver's seat, he heard an unsettling whisper from behind him. "Stay seated," it hissed softly. "You don't want to anger him." Jake turned around to see the figure at the back of the bus finally emerging from the shadows. It was a woman with long black hair hanging over her face like a curtain of darkness. Her clothes were tattered and stained, and her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, backing away slowly. "I am what remains," she said cryptically. "You should have never boarded this bus." Just then, there was another thud beneath them, a more violent one this time, and Jake stumbled backward. As panic surged through him, the driver's voice cut through the chaos. "We're almost there." "Where? Where are we going?" Jake shouted desperately. But before anyone could answer, the lights flickered back on for just a moment, illuminating something horrifying outside. Twisted trees with gnarled branches reaching toward them, like skeletal hands. And then everything went dark again. If you'd like me to continue or expand on specific elements of this story, or add more sections to reach your desired length, just let me know. The last bus continuation, the silence that followed the power outage was deafening. Inside the bus, panic reigned. Passengers whispered among themselves, their faces twisted in fear. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to move toward the driver, but his legs felt glued to the floor. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and for a brief moment, Jake saw a horrifying scene. A woman with long black hair stood in the aisle, and behind her, a chasm opened into darkness. She raised her hand as if pointing at something behind him. Jake turned around and saw something moving in the shadows, as if someone or something was approaching them. "What is that?" he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the collective scream of terror. At that moment, the lights went out again, and the bus plunged into pitch-black darkness. Jake felt cold sweat trickling down his spine. He knew he had to act. He stepped back and bumped into a woman with a tattered bag who was now sitting in her seat, gripping her bag so tightly that her fingers turned white. "We need to get out of here," Jake yelled. But before he could do anything, the bus jolted again. This time the impact was stronger, and Jake lost his balance, falling to the floor. He quickly got back on his feet and saw that the other passengers were also starting to rise, their faces filled with despair. "We can't stay here," shouted an old man with wild hair. "We need to open the doors." Jake rushed to the door, but it was locked. He pulled the handle with all his might, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, the lights flickered again, and he saw his own reflection in the glass, eyes wide with fear and panic. "Help!" he screamed. "Anyone?" Suddenly, the bus came to a halt once more, and silence fell over them. Then there was a crack like branches breaking outside. And again, the lights went out. Jake felt a cold dread grip his heart. He knew time was running out. Grabbing the nearest object, an old bag, he rushed to the door once more and slammed it with all his strength. "Open up!" But instead, the door swung open by itself, with a creak and a groan. For a moment, he saw outside the bus, a dark forest with trees that looked like ghosts with long arms. "Run!" shouted the old man. Without thinking, Jake bolted outside. He found himself on a narrow road surrounded by darkness. The wind howled through the trees, and he felt lost in this grim place. He glanced back at the bus, its doors still wide open, but inside there was only silence. No one was coming out. The passengers remained inside, as if something was holding them back. Jake felt a surge of adrenaline and sprinted forward down the road, not knowing where it led. He heard rustling and whispers behind him, but dared not look back. He ran as fast as he could until he broke free from the forest and found himself in an open field. The moonlight bathed the ground in silver light, and Jake stopped to catch his breath. He looked around. No bus, no trees, just an endless field with the night sky above him. But suddenly, he heard a sound, a low hum of an engine. Jake turned around and saw that very same old bus slowly emerging from the forest. It moved toward him with eerie calmness. "No!" he screamed and dashed back into the woods. He ran through the trees, feeling their cold branches scratching at his skin. Suddenly, he noticed a light in the distance. It was another bus. He rushed toward it, hoping for salvation. When he reached it, the doors were open. Inside sat people, ordinary people with normal faces. They looked at him with curiosity. "Get in!" shouted a woman at the wheel. Without hesitation, Jake jumped inside and slammed the door behind him. The bus started moving, and he felt relief wash over him. "What happened?" asked the woman. "There was another bus. It takes people," Jake blurted out. But no one reacted to his words. They simply stared at him in confusion. The bus continued down the road, but soon everything began to change. Familiar streets started to fade away, replaced by grim landscapes. Jake felt panic rising within him. "Where are we going?" he asked again. The woman at the wheel turned to him with a smile, but her eyes were empty. "Where we always go." Jake's heart sank in horror. He realized this was the same bus, the same route, and they were already part of this nightmare. Darkness enveloped them again as the bus continued its journey into the unknown.